That is a tarantula.
We'll do this.
Have you ever wondered what really happened behind the glitz of Johnny Carson's famous Late Show? What if I told you there were moments so bizarre, so jaw-dropping, that even seasoned TV veterans sat in stunned silence? Today we dig into 15 of the most insane moments in Carson's storied run. Fasten your seatbelt, you'll laugh, gasp, and replay your assumptions. And stick around, moment number 3 might just rewrite what you thought you knew. The Great Egg Vendetta. Picture a polished studio spotlight's shining audience primed for a refined conversation. Suddenly, Johnny Carson grabs a raw egg and flings it at guest Dom DeLuise. Eggshell shatters against DeLuise's jacket. Without missing a beat, DeLuise counterattacks. A full-scale egg war erupts, splattering desk camera and crew. Yolk runs down Carson's sleeve. The audience howls with laughter. The live broadcast grins with gleeful chaos. This wasn't mere slapstick. It became one of the show's legendary improvised bits. The staff later revealed they had no idea it would unfold that way. Carson, always the pro, turned a messy accident into comedic gold. He slid behind his desk, wiping Yolk ad-libbing lines about breakfast and Egg White treating the disaster as a virtuoso bit. Viewers at home thought it was pre-planned. It wasn't. The impact? It showed Carson's brilliance in turning the unexpected into showmanship. A splash of egg became a test of wit, timing, and quick recovery. After that night, every guest knew anything could happen. Whenever people talk about live TV moments that defy rehearsals, the egg battle is still mentioned. It's chaotic, absurd, and absolutely unforgettable. If there's a benchmark for things went off the rails in the best possible way, this is it. That egg fight reminds us Carson could transform a disaster into art. This is the kind of live TV alchemy that makes legends. The Tarantula Shuffle. Imagine Carson in his signature suit sitting behind his desk, greeting the audience with that calm grin. A handler brings in a tarantula, yes, a real hairy spider, to crawl up his arm or across his desk. The studio goes silent. The camera zooms. The audience leans forward. As the tarantula inches along, Carson freezes, half amused, half aghast. He shifts a sleeve. The spider pauses. Carson makes a joke. Well, that's one heck of a guest. He continues conversation, but his eyes track that critter like a hawk. At one point, he tosses a glance to Ed McMahon in horror. And when the spider finally finds a comfy crease and clings there, Carson releases a suppressed laugh and says, "Okay, that's staying there." This setup wasn't just prankish, it showed Carson's nerve and comic instincts. He played the straight man to nature's wild improv. The crew behind cameras whispered, the audience held breath, and Carson delivered.
How do you get a tarantula angry?
Well, by blowing on it.
I'm not going to blow.
It was telegraphed tension, then relief with humor in between. Impact? That moment became a lore piece among fans. It broke the barrier between host and audience. Hey, we're all in danger, but also in this together. It humanized Carson. No matter how polished he was, he could be unsettled. It also showed how the show flirted with danger, even for laughs. The tarantula bit proves Carson's talent. He could face creepy live surprises and turn them into comedic theater. Uri Geller versus Johnny Carson, the unforgettable showdown. When psychic Uri Geller appeared on Johnny Carson's show in 1973, he expected another easy demonstration of his spoon-bending powers. What he didn't know was that Carson, a former magician himself, had prepared a surprise that would change television history.
He is really suspicious, you know. I'm having a hard time with you.
Before the show, Carson secretly asked scientists to set up the props. They supplied fresh spoons and sealed containers that Geller couldn't tamper with. Everything looked normal, but this time, there would be no hidden tricks. Under the studio lights, Geller tried to perform. He stared at the spoons, rubbed their handles, muttered softly, and nothing happened. The crowd shifted in awkward silence. Carson sat back with that trademark smirk, offering calm encouragement while watching every move. Geller hesitated, blaming low energy and asking to stop. Carson, unflappable, leaned in with perfect comic timing. "Well," he said, "I guess we'll just have to wait for a stronger signal." The audience laughed. Geller looked defeated, and television witnessed one of its most jaw-dropping live moments. That night, the illusion cracked. Carson didn't mock, he simply let truth speak for itself. Millions realized what happens when confidence meets scrutiny, and it instantly became one of the most replayed segments in talk show history. Even today, people remember it as the moment that defined Johnny Carson. Sharp, fearless, and unwilling to fake a single laugh. Number 3 isn't just unforgettable, it's the night Johnny Carson exposed illusion with nothing but patience, wit, and a perfectly timed smile. Karnak's desk collapse. Most viewers knew the Karnak the Magnificent bit. Carson, as a mystical seer, would do comedic riddles. One night during that sketch, the desk broke beneath him, not part of the act. Mid-joke, the desk cracked. Carson shifted weight, a section gave way, and a slab tilts. Wood splinters. For a heartbeat, he teeters. The audience gasps. Then he steadies, keeps his composure, finishes the line. Answer, your furniture needs reinforcement. Behind the scenes, crew members rushed to support the desk, but Carson stayed in character, finished Karnak's segment, and segued back to interview with a quip about needing a sturdier platform for his mystic insights. The audience erupted. That moment tested the boundary between sketch and disaster. For viewers, it felt seamless. For the crew, it was a scramble. It reminds us how risky even comedic theater is under pressure, and it shows Carson's mastery. When equipment fails, improv becomes survival. The impact was twofold. First, it told every performer watching, always expect the unexpected. Second, it became a favorite anecdote in television history. Not everyone recovers from mid-set collapse. Carson did it with flair. The sketch became legendary not just for the humor, but for physical jeopardy. A collapsing desk could have derailed the show instead. Carson turned it into comedic legend. Don Rickles' cigarette box incident. Don Rickles, the merchant of venom, enters stage right. He's in good spirits, joking, poking fun. At some point, his elbow knocks Carson's cherished wooden cigarette box, an ornamental showpiece, and it smashes catastrophically. Wood flies, lid splits, audience gasps. Rickles freezes. Carson's expression flickers. Rickles, oh boy, your box just got rickled. Carson, recovering, tosses a line. I never got invited to that roast. But Rickles, never one to back down, marches over to Rickles' own studio next door. They were adjacent. Bursts on camera, mid-shot corners Rickles live and slaps him lightly, all in comedic retaliation. Then Carson storms back to his stage, wiping sawdust and wood chips, delivers a deadpan. All right, we'll continue as though nothing happened. That spontaneous chase and re-entry became classic. It's not just destruction, it's confrontation broadcast as comedy. It shows Rickles' fearlessness and Carson's willingness to break the fourth wall. The studio became terrain, not just a set. The impact, it blurred lines. Guest host, stage, backstage, all merged. Viewers watched a beef-turned sketch in real time. It elevated the show's unpredictability. Now when someone says anything goes, they're referencing things like this. Smashing sentimental props is one thing, chasing a guest across studios is another. That chestnut stayed in fans' memories for decades. Sumo showdown in studio. It started as a harmless comedy sketch, but what followed left audiences crying with laughter. Carson, always game for absurdity, decided to challenge a visiting sumo wrestler to a friendly push match. The wrestler stood 6 feet tall and looked like he could move a mountain. Carson, dressed in an oversized sumo robe, took his position on the stage mat, pretending to stretch and psych himself up. When the referee gave the signal, Carson charged and bounced off like a rubber ball. The wrestler barely moved an inch. Carson tried again, this time with exaggerated determination, and the wrestler gently nudged him back so hard that he slid across the floor, nearly into the camera pit. The audience exploded in laughter as Carson, red-faced but grinning, crawled back to his spot and declared, I think he cheated. The brilliance of the bit wasn't in the fall, it was in Carson's commitment to the absurd. He milked every reaction, pretending to take it seriously, even challenging for a rematch, once he gained 50 pounds. By the time the wrestler raised Carson's arm in mock victory, the audience couldn't breathe from laughing. This became one of those moments that defined why viewers loved him, the blend of ego, playfulness, and timing. Even when he was the butt of the joke, Carson knew the secret. Humility is comedy gold. When a sumo champion sends you sliding across the stage And you still own the room that's showmanship at its finest. The domino disaster. A record attempt on live television sounds thrilling until it collapses, literally. A guest engineer had built a massive domino display across Carson's set, thousands of colorful tiles forming the word Johnny. Carson, curious but cautious, walked the perimeter, teasing the builder. One wrong sneeze and you're out of show business. Then it happened. Not even a sneeze, just an innocent gesture. Carson leaned in, gestured too close to a domino, and the first one tipped. It was like a cinematic slow motion. The entire chain reaction raced across the stage, toppling the design long before the official demonstration could begin. The audience roared. The guest froze in disbelief. Carson threw his hands up and yelled, "Well, I guess we can confirm gravity works." Rather than cutting to commercial, Carson turned the chaos into a comedy masterclass. He interviewed the devastated builder about his career-ending moment, sympathizing while cracking jokes about job openings in bricklaying. The builder laughed through his frustration, and the audience adored the candid disaster. What could have been a nightmare turned into one of Carson's most talked-about sequences. It highlighted his instinct for turning embarrassment, his own, or someone else's, into a perfect laugh. Only Carson could knock down a guest's life's work and still make them laugh about it 5 seconds later. Snake on the set. Some hosts flinch at live animals. Johnny Carson invited them and occasionally regretted it. One unforgettable episode featured a visiting zookeeper showing off exotic creatures. When he brought out a long, restless snake, Carson leaned back but tried to play it cool. The handler laid the snake across the desk for a demonstration, and for a brief, glorious second, all seemed fine. Then the snake slithered off. It vanished under the desk coils, disappearing between the host's feet. The audience shrieked. Carson shot up faster than a starting pistol, jumping back with his chair clattering behind him. Ed McMahon was already doubled over, wheezing with laughter. Crew members rushed in with poles, but the snake was quick, darting beneath equipment and cables. Carson, ever the master of timing, stood on his chair and announced, "Folks, this is the first time in television history a host has been replaced by a reptile, and he's probably funnier." The tension melted into hysterics. When the snake was finally secured, Carson deadpanned, "I've had guests who were slippery, but never this literal." Moments like this showcased why his show felt alive. It wasn't polished perfection, it was unpredictable theater. And Carson thrived on that knife's edge between control and chaos. A runaway snake, a fearless host, and a room full of laughter, classic Carson magic at its most unhinged. Brooke Shields' prank gone wrong. In the early 1980s, young actress Brooke Shields appeared alongside her mother for what was supposed to be a lighthearted segment. Together, they secretly planned to prank Carson by faking a dramatic fall during her entrance. The problem? No one told the host or the crew. As Brooke walked out, waving to fans, she pretended to trip and actually hit the floor harder than expected. The thud silenced the crowd. Carson leaped from behind his desk, panic flashing across his face. Cameras wobbled as crew members scrambled to help. Shields then burst into laughter, sitting up with a grin. The audience realized it was a joke, erupting in applause. Carson's relief turned into mock fury. "You almost killed me, Brooke," he joked. "Next time, just send a card." But what made this moment legendary wasn't just the prank, it was how it peeled back Carson's composure for a split second. Viewers saw genuine concern, then instant humor. He wasn't just the quick-witted host, he was human. The next day, newspapers replayed the moment frame by frame. Some called it one of the most convincing live pranks in talk show history. Carson later admitted he nearly cut to commercial in shock. It began as a harmless prank and ended as one of the rare times Johnny Carson truly lost his cool, proof that live TV doesn't need a script to be unforgettable. Robot meltdown on air. It was the future, or so the engineers promised. A guest unveiled a prototype humanoid robot designed to shake hands and answer questions. Carson, fascinated, greeted it with his trademark charm. "Well, meet my replacement." At first, the robot responded smoothly. Then its programming glitched. One arm began spinning uncontrollably. Lights flickered. The voice box repeated, "Hello, hello, hello," louder each time. Carson leaned back, half laughing, half alarmed. "You've built my ex," he quipped, earning thunderous laughter. The engineer frantically hit switches. Nothing worked. The robot lurched forward, knocking over a glass of water and nearly tipping off the desk. The audience gasped, then howled. Carson turned the malfunction into a live comedy routine, interviewing the robot about its feelings and asking if it was nervous on television. The more chaotic it got, the sharper his jokes became. By the time the engineer finally unplugged the machine, the crowd was in tears from laughter. That clip later circulated as one of Carson's all-time funniest moments. Technology meets disaster rescued by pure charisma. It perfectly symbolized his style. When everything fails, the humor begins. A short circuit, a soaked desk, and a perfect punchline. Carson versus Robot remains one of the greatest live comedy saves ever broadcast. When the audience took over, it began like any other comedy sketch, Johnny in character, Ed McMahon, barely holding in his laughter, and the crowd in that sweet, expectant hush before the punchline. But then something truly surreal happened. A few audience members, perhaps emboldened by the mood, decided to join the act. They shouted improvised lines, stood up, and one even stepped into the aisle as if auditioning on live television. For a moment, you could see the confusion flicker across Carson's face. Was this a planned gag? A hidden camera prank? Nope, pure unscripted chaos. Security hesitated, unsure if this was part of the show. And Johnny? He did what only he could do, leaned back, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Looks like they're replacing me with volunteers now." The audience erupted in laughter, instantly shifting the tension into pure entertainment. Carson invited one of the bold fans to finish the joke, handed him a cue card, and let him stumble through a few lines. It was awkward, hilarious, and utterly unpredictable. When the fan finally sat down, Carson delivered the knockout. "That's why I get paid, folks." The moment became infamous because it showed the dangerous beauty of live television. Anything can happen, and it usually does when Carson's around. Instead of losing control, he turned pandemonium into performance art. Only Johnny Carson could face an audience rebellion and still leave everyone cheering, proof that the real show wasn't scripted, it was instinct. Carson versus the malfunctioning mic. One night during a smooth interview segment, Carson's microphone decided it had had enough. Mid-sentence, it began producing an odd screeching sound, the kind that makes producers panic and viewers reach for the volume button. Johnny paused, stared at the ceiling, and deadpanned. "Ladies and gentlemen, that's my inner voice escaping." The crew scrambled, waving from behind the cameras. The audio engineer's face turned pale, but Carson didn't miss a beat. He picked up the mic, gave it a gentle tap, and whispered, "You still with me, buddy?" The audience roared. Then it squealed again, even louder. Carson stood up, turned to Ed McMahon, and said, "If it answers, I'm quitting show business." What could have been a disaster became a spontaneous masterclass in comedic improvisation. The screech returned twice more, perfectly punctuating Johnny's jokes, almost as if the equipment had a sense of humor. By the time it was fixed, the audience was laughing so hard that Carson's apology, "Well, at least it has good timing," drew a standing ovation. In an era where live television mistakes could ruin reputations, Carson proved the opposite. Imperfection could be comedy gold. Viewers loved that he never hid behind the polish, he embraced the flaws. The mic may have failed, but Carson didn't. He turned static into stand-up and made television history one squill at a time. The great celebrity roast reversal. Johnny Carson was known for his wit, but this night he reminded everyone that he could hit back twice as hard. During a friendly roast segment, a guest comedian started taking unusually sharp jabs at Carson's age, career, and love life. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if it was all in good fun. Carson sat still, smiling politely until the final barb landed a little too personal. He paused, straightened his tie, and then delivered a single devastating comeback. "Thank you," I'd respond, "but your career already did that for me." The room froze for half a second and then exploded. Even the guests broke into uncontrollable laughter. That unscripted counterpunch became an instant legend, not because it was mean, but because it was precisely balanced, sharp enough to sting, smooth enough to charm. It reminded everyone that Carson wasn't just a host, he was a professional duelist armed with timing instead of a sword. Afterward, when asked if the moment was rehearsed, Carson simply smiled and said, "No, I just had 30 years of practice." Never pick a verbal fight with Johnny Carson. You'll lose gracefully, but you'll still lose on national television. The on-air feint. It's one of those moments that people still debate, did it really happen? During an ordinary monologue, Carson suddenly stopped mid-sentence, blinked twice, and slowly slumped forward. The audience gasped. Ed McMahon stood up. Then after a long, terrifying pause, Johnny lifted his head, blinked again, and said, "Sorry, I just fell asleep listening to myself." The studio burst into laughter so loud the cameras shook. But for a few seconds, everyone thought the host had actually fainted. Carson milked it perfectly, staggering around, pretending to forget what show he was on and asking for a pillow and a rerun. Later, he admitted the bit was partly intentional, partly improv, a way to poke fun at how long his opening monologues sometimes ran. But that deadpan delivery, that perfectly timed fall, cemented it as one of his best-remembered moments. It was classic Carson physical comedy, laced with self-deprecation, suspense blended with relief. He turned what could have been a heart-stopping scare into one of his funniest performances. For 30 unforgettable seconds, viewers thought the king of late night had gone down. Turns out he was just delivering another knockout joke. The final farewell duet. After decades of laughter, pranks, and timeless television, Johnny Carson's final broadcast in the early 1990s was supposed to be simple. But nothing about it turned out simple. It became one of the most emotional nights in TV history. Bette Midler, one of his favorite guests, walked on stage unexpectedly. The crowd rose in applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Carson's eyes glistened. Midler smiled and began to sing, "One for my baby and one more for the road." Midway through, Carson joined in softly, sincerely. For once, the joke stopped. It was raw, human, and heartbreakingly beautiful. When the song ended, Carson stood, bowed slightly, and whispered, "Good night." No monologue, no jokes, just silence and gratitude. Millions watching at home felt it the end of an era. Critics later called it the most graceful exit in television history. That final duet captured everything Carson stood for: warmth, humility, and perfect timing, even in goodbye. It wasn't a punchline that closed Johnny Carson's show. It was a song, a moment of pure emotion, and a reminder that laughter, when genuine, never really ends. So what made Johnny Carson's moments so unforgettable? It wasn't just the laughter, it was the truth behind it. The live chaos, the misfires, the brilliance born from mistakes. No cue cards, no do-overs, just a man who turned unpredictability into art. If one of these moments made you grin, drop a comment below. Which one shocked you most, the prank, the chaos, or the goodbye that made you tear up?